The Galactic Empire had conquered hundreds of planets, each falling one by one as their military might crushed all who stood in their way. Their empire was vast, their technology unparalleled, and their armies seemingly invincible. To the rulers of this great empire, nothing in the universe could pose a real threat to their power, especially not a race as primitive as humanity. They had no reason to fear the humans. After all, what could a species stuck on a single, puny planet possibly do against the might of an empire that wielded weapons capable of destroying whole cities with a single blast? The Empire's warships were gigantic, armed with energy cannons that could incinerate any fleet in moments. Their ground troops were enhanced with cybernetic implants, nearly invulnerable to conventional weaponry. Their mechs towered over any soldier, a blend of advanced technology and brute force. Humanity's weapons, on the other hand, were an ancient joke, at least, that's what the Imperial commanders thought. The humans had tanks, yes, but not the sleek, energy-fueled, anti-gravity machines the Empire used. No, the humans clung to relics of a forgotten era, the M1 Abrams, a battle tank from the 20th century. It was an ironclad, heavily armored machine with a 120mm smoothbore cannon and treads that churned through dirt and debris. To the Empire's generals, the M1 Abrams was no more than a museum piece, a relic of a bygone age that had no place on the battlefield against their highly advanced forces. One Imperial commander, General Xyrix, scoffed at the humans' outdated weaponry. The fact that they were still using tanks in an era of energy shields and laser guns was laughable. The humans are nothing but a dying breed, clinging to the past, he muttered, inspecting his command room's holographic display. They won't last long. Our forces will crush them, and their tanks will fall like paper to our energy beams. Xyrix wasn't the only one who shared this opinion. Across the Empire, there was a general consensus that humans had no place in the galaxy. Even their greatest warships were nothing compared to the might of the Empire's fleet. The humans, primitive and isolated, had simply survived due to sheer luck. But no more. The Empire was about to wipe them off the map, making their victory as effortless as squashing an insect. The Empire's invasion of Earth's distant colony, Dareth 7, was already underway. The human defenders, a ragtag group of soldiers, had gathered their best fighters, but they were vastly outnumbered. The colony wasn't strategically significant, just a small outpost with a few hundred military personnel stationed to maintain control. But the Empire didn't care about the size of the colony, they cared only about erasing humanity from the galaxy. The human commander, Captain Harris, had been in the military long enough to know the odds. He had seen the reports, the overwhelming superiority of the Imperial forces. His heart sank when he saw the numbers, thousands of troops, mechs, and war machines. But he wasn't about to go down without a fight. He looked over the battlefield and then at the only thing his forces had that might make a difference, the M1 Abrams tanks. Despite the Empire's technological superiority, humanity had learned the value of ingenuity and adaptability. Harris had been stationed on Dareth 7 for months, maintaining the tank fleet, running drills, and preparing for this very moment. The tanks had long since stopped being the laughing stock of the Imperial officers, who had viewed them as outdated. The tanks, which had once been mocked as an antiquated weapon, were the last line of defense for humanity's survival. And Captain Harris knew they weren't as obsolete as the Empire thought. "Sir," said Lieutenant Richards, the commander of one of the Abrams crews, "are we really going to use these old beasts? They're hardly the match for the Empire's mechs." Harris turned, his face steely with resolve. "These beasts are the best we've got, Lieutenant. We use what we have. Our tanks are built to take hits, to withstand punishment. They might be outdated, but they're not fragile. And we'll make them pay for underestimating us." Richards nodded, though there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. The lieutenant wasn't alone. Most of the soldiers on the ground shared his concerns. The M1 Abrams tanks were heavy, slow-moving, and lacking the advanced targeting systems and energy weapons that the Empire's forces wielded. To many, it seemed like a suicide mission, a desperate last stand. But Harris had faith in the old tank. The Abrams was a symbol of human persistence. It might not have the high-tech features of the Empire's war machines, but it had something the aliens couldn't understand: durability. The M1's thick armor could withstand blows that would have crippled lesser vehicles, and its cannon could punch through forces no one thought possible. The humans had learned how to fight with what they had, using intelligence and resourcefulness to turn the tables. The first signs of the Empire's arrival came with the sky turning dark as their fleet descended. The sound of their dropships rattled the air, followed by the thundering steps of their armored forces as they touched down on the surface of Dareth 7. It was chaos. The planet shook under the weight of the Empire's attack, and Captain Harris issued orders over his comms to move the tanks into position. The first wave of the Empire's ground forces charged toward the human defenses with little hesitation. Elite shock troops, towering mechs, and automated walkers stormed the human lines. The enemy's energy shields hummed in the distance, and laser fire streaked across the sky. It seemed like humanity was outmatched. The M1 Abrams tanks were mere blips on the Empire's radar, a joke, an anachronism. No one would have expected them to amount to anything more than cannon fodder in the face of such advanced weaponry. But that's where the Empire made its fatal mistake. As the enemy closed in, Captain Harris barked his orders, and the M1 Abrams tanks rolled forward. The ground shook beneath their treads as they came into range. The first shots rang out, loud and thunderous, as the M1s opened fire on the advancing forces. The tanks were slow, yes, but each shot they fired from their 120mm cannon was devastating. Explosions erupted in the ranks of the Empire's infantry, and mechs fell to the ground in a cloud of smoke and debris. "Direct hit. Target destroyed," shouted one of the tank crew members. The first wave of Imperial forces faltered. The aliens' energy shields could block most attacks, but not from the M1s. The heavy shells slammed into them with brutal force, tearing through their defenses. The alien soldiers and machines, so sure of their superiority, were caught by surprise. They had no defense against the raw power and brutal simplicity of the human weaponry. The Abrams armor absorbed everything the Empire threw at it, while the cannon kept ripping through the ranks of their troops. It was a shock to the Imperial forces. Their overconfidence was shattered in the span of moments. From the command center, General Zyrex watched in disbelief as his forces were decimated. The reports came in, each one worse than the last. "What is happening?" he demanded, eyes narrowing. "Why are the humans' weapons so effective?" "Sir, the M1 Abrams tanks are taking down our mechs. We've lost contact with half of our forward units," the officer at his side said, panic creeping into his voice. Zyrex's mind raced. How could this be happening? The humans had no right to stand their ground like this. The tanks were supposed to be nothing more than a speed bump. But the humans weren't fighting fair. They were fighting smart. They used the terrain, ambushed the Empire's forces from unexpected angles, and kept the pressure on, never giving the invaders a chance to regroup. And each time the Empire thought they had the upper hand, another M1 Abrams tank appeared, its cannon roaring as it decimated everything in its path. This wasn't just a battle for survival. This was a lesson in humility for the Empire. And it was far from over. The tide of the battle had shifted in ways the Empire never anticipated. Their ground forces, which had been marching toward victory with supreme confidence, were now in disarray. The initial underestimation of humanity's weaponry was now a deadly mistake that the Galactic Empire's commanders were scrambling to rectify. General Zyrex stood at the center of his command room, fuming with frustration. His holographic display showed the situation growing worse by the minute. What was supposed to be an easy victory for the Empire had turned into a chaotic nightmare. His elite forces, mechs, cyber-enhanced soldiers, and advanced vehicles, were being torn apart by the simple, brutish power of the M1 Abrams tanks. They weren't just holding their own, they were decimating the Empire's troops with brutal efficiency. Deploy reinforcements now. Order the reserve units to the front. I want those tanks destroyed. Xyrix barked, slamming his fist on the console. His mind raced, trying to come up with a strategy to regain control. The M1 Abrams tanks weren't just surviving, they were turning the tide of the battle. It didn't make sense. These machines were relics, outdated and primitive, yet they were wrecking his advanced forces. On the ground, the human soldiers, led by Captain Harris, continued to press the advantage. Harris had seen enough battles to know when the tide was turning. His tanks, though outdated, were proving to be a force to be reckoned with. Each tank crew was executing precise, coordinated attacks, targeting weak points in the Empire's forces, exploiting every flaw. Harris and his men weren't just fighting with brute force, they were using their brains, their knowledge of the terrain, and the power of their tanks to outwit and outlast the enemy. Lieutenant Richards, take your squad to the east flank. They're setting up artillery, and I need those positions neutralized, Harris ordered, his voice calm but firm. The rest of you, keep the pressure on. Don't let them regroup. We'll finish this now. Richards nodded, signaling to his tank crew as they moved into position. The Empire's forces were attempting to adjust, but their command structure was unraveling. They were used to overwhelming their enemies with sheer firepower, but they hadn't counted on humanity's resourcefulness. The M1 Abrams tanks, far from being outdated, were now a symbol of human ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds. Harris wasn't just a tank commander, he was a strategist. He knew that the Empire's forces were only as strong as their ability to coordinate. If he could break that coordination, the battle would be won. The tanks were his hammer, and the Empire's command structure was his anvil. The humans didn't have the numbers, the technology, or the firepower to stand toe-to-toe with the Empire in a traditional fight. But they didn't need to. They had something far more dangerous, an understanding of how to fight dirty, how to use every advantage, no matter how small. The M1 Abrams tanks were slow, heavy, and cumbersome, but they were also incredibly tough. Their thick armor could take hits from weapons that would have disabled any other vehicle. The Empire's high-tech weaponry, while powerful, couldn't break through the Abrams defense quickly enough. As the battle wore on, the Empire's forces began to show signs of wear. The mechs, once towering and invincible, were being reduced to scrap. Human tank crews, working in pairs, ambushed them from multiple angles. A single shot from an M1 Abrams would cripple the mech's legs, causing it to collapse, vulnerable to further attacks. The cyber-enhanced soldiers, trained to fight with advanced weapons, were having trouble dealing with the sheer power and durability of the Abrams. Their energy shields, which had been designed to deflect high-energy blasts, weren't able to cope with the raw kinetic force of the Abrams shells. The battlefield had become a nightmare for the Empire. They had no idea how to fight back against a force that refused to play by their rules. The M1 Abrams tanks weren't playing a conventional game, they were playing a human game, a game of grit, endurance, and intelligence. They fought not just with strength but with the understanding that victory didn't always go to the biggest or the strongest. It went to those who could adapt, who could make their enemies underestimate them, and then hit them where it hurt the most. Meanwhile, General Xyrix was beside himself with rage. His imperial pride, bruised by the failures of his forces, made it even harder to accept. He had never expected this. His forces were far superior in every way, and yet they were being crushed by tanks that should have been relics of history. His communication system buzzed, and an officer's voice broke through his thoughts. "Sir, we've lost contact with our forward command units. The humans, they're turning our troops against us. We have no control over the battlefield anymore." Xyrix felt the weight of those words pressed down on him. It wasn't just the loss of troops, it was the collapse of his command structure. The Empire's superiority complex had blinded them to one simple truth: they had underestimated the humans. And now they were paying the price. On the front lines, Captain Harris knew that they couldn't let up. The battle was far from over, but they were beginning to see the first signs of victory. The Empire's once unassailable forces were now retreating in disarray. The human soldiers, emboldened by their success, fought with renewed vigor. Every time an Imperial soldier or mech fell, it sent a ripple of panic through the enemy lines. And with every successful attack, Harris and his men proved to the Empire that the humans were not to be underestimated. "Move in and secure the northern flank," Harris ordered, signaling his tanks to push forward. "We don't let them regroup. Not now." The Empire's retreat began to take shape as a slow, panicked withdrawal. They weren't just retreating because of the threat posed by the tanks, they were retreating because they couldn't maintain the illusion of invincibility anymore. The M1 Abrams tanks had shattered that illusion, and now the Empire's once feared forces were scrambling to regain control. Xyrex was watching this unfold on his display. The human victory wasn't just a loss on the battlefield, it was a blow to the Empire's very pride. This was not just a tactical defeat. This was a humiliation. With the loss of several key battalions, Xyrex ordered his fleet to pull back. But even as they retreated, he knew the damage had been done. The humans, despite their seemingly primitive weaponry, had turned the battlefield into a slaughterhouse for the Empire's finest troops. The tanks, those old relics, had proven more dangerous than the Empire had ever imagined. In the end, it wasn't just the M1 Abrams that won the battle, it was the spirit of humanity itself. In the aftermath, the soldiers on the ground cheered as the Empire's forces retreated into the distance. Harris stood with his crew, sweat and dust staining his uniform, but a smile tugging at his lips. He'd seen many battles in his time, but this one would go down in history. "We did it," Richard said, shaking his head in disbelief. "We actually did it." Captain Harris chuckled, his eyes gleaming with pride. "Yeah. We sure did. And those tanks? They may be old, but they just proved something. The Empire might have the technology, but we've got something they'll never understand, the heart to fight when everyone else thinks we're finished." And with that, humanity's triumph was sealed. The battlefield was eerily quiet now, the dust hanging heavy in the air, the remnants of the battle littering the ground. What had once been a full-scale assault by the Empire had devolved into a disorganized retreat, their forces scattering in every direction. The once proud Empire, whose fleets had swept through the galaxy without a challenge, was now faced with the undeniable fact that they had been utterly bested by what they considered primitive humans and their outdated weapons. General Xyrex, his face flushed with a mixture of rage and disbelief, stood at the helm of his flagship, staring at the live feed of the retreat. The reports were pouring in, each one more damning than the last. His elite troops, the very best the Empire had to offer, were being routed by mere tanks. Tanks! It was an insult, a humiliation of the highest order. The very foundation of the Empire's belief in their superiority had been shattered. His pride had been wounded, and worse, his strategic genius was now in question. "You were right about the M1 Abrams, sir," one of his officers said carefully, trying to gauge Xyrex's mood. "It's not just the tank. It's the humans behind it. Their strategy, their will to fight, it's something we didn't account for." Xyrex didn't respond at first. He couldn't. Every word from his subordinates felt like a fresh wound. He had thought that the Empire's technological dominance would be enough to subdue these puny humans, but he hadn't expected them to fight back with such cunning and relentless determination. The more he thought about it, the more it gnawed at him. He had underestimated them, dismissed them, and now his entire fleet was in disarray. "Enough," he finally snapped. "Get me a status report from the front lines. I want to know exactly how we lost this battle." The officer hesitated but then complied, tapping a series of commands into the console. The data came up in front of him, showing a map of the battlefield with red and green indicators marking the various engagements. The numbers were staggering. Human forces had inflicted losses so severe that even the Empire's vaunted fleet had been unable to recover. It was clear that the M1 Abrams had played a pivotal role, but the real blow had been the humans' sheer resourcefulness. "Sir, it seems that after we lost our command structure, the humans began using their tanks as mobile command posts. They started coordinating attacks from multiple locations, ambushing our troops when we least expected it. Their infantry used their surroundings to funnel our forces into kill zones." Xyrix's eyes narrowed. He had been so focused on the tanks themselves, he had overlooked the human tactics that accompanied them. It wasn't just the M1 Abrams, it was the soldiers inside them. These humans were not mere cannon fodder. They were clever, unpredictable, and, most importantly, they had a deep, unwavering belief in their ability to win. And that belief had turned the tide. "We underestimated them," Xyrix muttered, more to himself than to anyone in the room. "We thought that their weapons were primitive, their strategies outdated. But they knew how to make their advantage count." The Empire's advanced technology was no match for the ingenuity and resourcefulness of the human forces. The mechs, once the pride of the Empire's military, had been rendered ineffective. The cyborg soldiers, designed for precision and high-tech warfare, found themselves ill-equipped to handle the brute force of the M1 Abrams. The tanks didn't need advanced targeting systems or energy weapons. They had sheer firepower, thick armor, and the experience of humans who had fought and died in countless wars. That was their strength. "Sir, we've also recovered footage of their tank commander," another officer said, bringing up a video feed. The image was fuzzy, but the message was clear. It showed Captain Harris, standing tall beside his tank, speaking to his crew with calm authority. There was a sense of confidence in his movements, a quiet strength in his voice. But what stood out was the look in his eyes. It wasn't fear, or even determination. It was something more primal, defiance. "Captain Harris. He's not just a soldier," Xyrix said slowly, as if he were piecing together the truth for the first time. "He's a symbol. A symbol of everything we thought we had destroyed in the humans. Their will to fight. Their ability to survive. To adapt." The officer nodded grimly. "They didn't give up, sir. Even when their odds were overwhelming, they fought on. And they did it in a way we couldn't counter." Xyrix clenched his fists, his mind racing through every decision, every misstep that had led them here. They had been defeated, not by technology, but by something far more dangerous, human tenacity. It was a concept the Empire had long abandoned. They had become so reliant on their superior tech that they forgot one simple truth: there was always a way to outsmart superior firepower. And the humans had found it. In the aftermath of the battle, as the last of the Empire's forces retreated into the horizon, the human soldiers gathered around their tanks, their faces illuminated by the flickering fires that marked the remains of the battlefield. They had done the impossible. The M1 Abrams tanks, relics from a bygone era, had proven to be more than just machines of war. They were symbols of human resilience, of a species that had fought to survive against impossible odds. Captain Harris stood at the front of his crew, surveying the battlefield with a quiet pride. His soldiers, battered but unbroken, were taking stock of their victory. The humans had been underestimated, mocked as weak and outdated, but in the end, they had turned the tables on an empire that had once believed it was invincible. "We did it," Harris said, his voice steady and filled with a sense of accomplishment. "We showed them what it means to underestimate a human." Richards, one of the tank commanders, grinned and clapped Harris on the shoulder. "You know, sir, I think we just proved a point. We may not have the fancy tech, but we've got something they'll never have. Guts." The rest of the crew chuckled, the tension from the battle easing for a moment. But Harris knew the truth. This victory wasn't just about defeating the Empire. It was about sending a message. Humanity was not a race to be taken lightly. They might not have the advanced weaponry or the superior technology of the Empire, but they had something far more dangerous: the ability to adapt, to fight, and to win, even when the odds were stacked against them. As the Empire limped away, humiliated and broken, the humans stood victorious, knowing that their victory would echo across the galaxy. They had proved that no matter how advanced their enemies were, they could always be outwitted, outmaneuvered, and defeated. The M1 Abrams had proven itself not just as a weapon of war, but as a symbol of human ingenuity and the relentless spirit of a species that would never back down. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all. The victory over the Galactic Empire had sent shockwaves through the galaxy. News of the defeat spread quickly, reaching distant corners where the Empire's reach had once seemed untouchable. The Empire, which had crushed countless civilizations, now found itself facing an enemy it had underestimated, and the repercussions of that mistake were far-reaching. Humanity, once dismissed as weak and insignificant, had proved itself to be a force capable of shaking the foundations of the galaxy's most powerful empire. On Earth, the aftermath of the battle was celebrated as a defining moment in human history. The M1 Abrams tanks, relics of a past war, had become symbols of the human spirit, of ingenuity, resilience, and a determination to fight against overwhelming odds. The victory wasn't just about the tanks or the tactics. It was about humanity's ability to adapt and overcome, even when faced with the most advanced technology the universe had to offer. Military leaders around the world began studying the battle, analyzing every detail of the human strategy. The way they had used the M1 Abrams tanks in unorthodox ways, employing old-school guerrilla tactics combined with their sheer unpredictability, had caught the Empire off guard. The soldiers had made every shot count, using their environment to their advantage, and outsmarting a technologically superior enemy at every turn. It wasn't just the military that took notice. Political leaders and diplomats began to reconsider their stance on humanity's place in the galaxy. The Empire's retreat had been swift, but it had left behind a valuable lesson: underestimating humanity was a grave mistake. The humans had shown that they could hold their own in a galaxy ruled by more advanced species, and that alone was enough to shift the power dynamic. No longer would they be treated as mere pawns in the grand galactic game. As Earth prepared to defend itself against any future attacks, there was a renewed sense of unity. The battle had brought humanity together in a way that few events in history had. Different nations, once divided by borders and ideologies, now found common ground in the face of a shared threat. The entire human race had come together to defend their world, and it had paid off. The result was a stronger, more unified planet, one that had proven it could stand up to the most powerful forces in the universe. But the humans knew the battle wasn't over. The Empire's defeat was just one chapter in a larger conflict. There would be more battles, more enemies to face, but now, humanity was ready. They understood that the M1 Abrams tanks were more than just machines, they were symbols of the human will to survive, to fight, and to never back down, no matter the odds. Every soldier who had fought that day, every commander who had led their troops with a fierce determination, knew that they had set a precedent. The Empire may have retreated, but they had learned a lesson they wouldn't soon forget: humanity was not to be trifled with. The human commanders were well aware of the implications of their victory. It wasn't just a tactical win, it was a statement. They had shown the galaxy that even the most advanced technology couldn't guarantee victory. The Empire had relied too heavily on its technological superiority and had failed to account for the adaptability of the human spirit. In that, humanity had found its greatest strength. It wasn't their weapons that had won the day, it was their minds, their ability to think on their feet, and their refusal to give up. It was the human ingenuity that had turned the tide. Back at the command center, General Harris, who had led the charge, stood looking over the final reports. The retreat of the Empire was complete. His troops were exhausted, but the victory was theirs. Harris couldn't help but reflect on what had happened, how his small, ragtag force had faced down the Empire's might and come out on top. The M1 Abrams tanks, once mocked and dismissed as relics, had proven themselves time and time again. Their rugged design, simple yet effective, had become a symbol of everything the Empire had failed to understand about humanity. His mind wandered to the future. The war was far from over, but humanity had now proven that it could hold its own. The Empire had been the first to learn this lesson, but there would be others who would soon discover the same thing. Earth was no longer just a small, insignificant planet on the edge of the galaxy. It was a world that had made its mark. And that mark would be hard to erase. The victory had been hard-earned, but it was only the beginning. Humanity had earned the respect of the galaxy's most powerful empire, and they would build on that respect to secure their place in the cosmos. The M1 Abrams tanks, once thought obsolete, would be just one part of a new era of human warfare. A new era that would be defined by the unyielding spirit of a species that refused to be conquered, no matter how advanced the enemy. Humanity's victory was a reminder to all that, in the end, it wasn't technology that decided the outcome of a battle. It was the will to fight, the ability to adapt, and the refusal to accept defeat. As the last remnants of the Empire's forces retreated, the humans stood tall, knowing that they had proven something far more important than just military prowess. They had proven that, in the face of insurmountable odds, humanity could always find a way to win. And so, the story of the M1 Abrams and the human victory over the Galactic Empire would go down in history, not just as a tactical achievement, but as a symbol of human ingenuity, courage, and the indomitable will to survive. The lesson was clear: never underestimate the power of humanity, for no matter how advanced the enemy, there would always be a way to outsmart them and come out victorious.